Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Welcome to Enhance International's 17th in a series of webinars on building, evolving, resilient enterprise. Thank you for taking the time to attend, especially in light of the COVID restrictions. We hope that your family are safe and healthy, especially during these holiday times. My name is Jim DeVries, founder, president of Enhance International Group. EIG is a platform of 40 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers dedicated to empowering your organization's workforce by focusing on the partners' expanse of expertise. Our goal is to provide collective, collaborative experience, thought leadership to enable organizations to deliver the self-sustaining 1 + 1 + 1 = infinity. We hope you find this information useful. All the slides, the audio, the video will be available online, as all of our videos are online of our webinars and can be accessed at any time. Since March, we've been providing webinars on everything from risk appetite, risk resiliency, agility in the supply chain, IT, operations, to the entire enterprise. We covered the W recovery and the 3 Rs with aligned to COVID, which we'll refer to today. We've talked about cybersecurity and how agility can be used to help in that area. We've talked about artificial intelligence and how it's being used to build more resilient enterprises. And we've discussed empowering employees through rapid skills deployment. So this is our third Fireside chat. We have some upcoming webinars in January from the W recovery in a 90-day action plan, new product introduction, speed and recovery, artificial intelligence document automation, the how-to, 3 simple steps, and talent rapid skills deployment. So January is a very full month of informative webinars. With us today, we have our core team here, and I'll have each one of them introduce themselves. We'll start off with Dr. Phil Samuel from Lean Methods Group. Phil?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Phil Samuel from Lean Methods Group. We focus on strategy to execution with 3 practice areas: operational excellence, continuous improvement, innovation design, new product, new process, new business models, and then strategy development and strategic planning. And the theme around all of them is wrapped around change, acceleration, and change leadership.
Thanks, Phil. Greg Schlegel, founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. Great to be here with you. I'm the founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium. It's a group of 30 companies at the moment, about 1,500 supply chain risk pros around the globe. We bring tools, techniques, methodologies, and solutions that help us identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks. I've been a supply chain exec for several Fortune 100 companies across multiple industries, spent 7 years with IBM as a supply chain executive consultant, and presently teach supply chain risk management at Lehigh University and enterprise risk management at Villanova University. Great to be with you.
Thanks, Greg. And our other Greg, Dr. Greg McLaughlin.
Yes, good afternoon, good morning. Basically, my background is in the innovation quality area. I'm an analytical practitioner, which means that I look at data in a way that I can determine patterns and forecast that data in terms of what's going to happen with it, and also working with Jim in terms of a rapid skills development process to get employees rapidly skilled in order to get them to perform various roles in organization. But more than just that, I also work in the education field. I work with many doctoral dissertations, developed a research doctorate for a major university. I live in Fort Lauderdale. I'm an ordained deacon, have a patent, and have written 30 songs which have been published.
And he'll sing one at the end, right?
I write them, I don't sing them. But that's
Okay. All right. And next we have Sri Tarjija.
Good morning, everyone. Sri Tarasia. I'm a CEO of Process Scope LLC. So we are a platform to digitize your hidden factories, digitize your process improvement opportunities. So we I'm also a technology and digital automation enthusiast. And we engage in propelling your digital transformation and put it on a fast track. So as part of that, we optimize your business processes. We look at data and systems and provide that integrated platform for visibility and management insight to make processes and businesses better. Thank you. Looking forward to this fireside chat today.
Thanks, Sri. And then we have C. Bunovich
Hi,
from Fuse Machines.
I'm C, and I'm speaking to you from Martha's Vineyard today, but normally I'm in New York City, but I decided to escape the city and have a very peaceful time in the country. Fuse Machines is an AI talent consulting and education company. We help people who want to get started in AI. Most companies do want to get started, but they're not exactly sure what the process is. They have data, but they're not sure how to get their data to work for them. Well, I would say that's true of about 2/3 of the companies that we work with. 1/3 actually do know what they want, and sometimes they just need some extra talent. We also support companies with upskilling. So if you've got some engineers who want to learn the latest techniques in machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, or NLP, we consider ourselves experts in those areas. A fun fact, since I don't sing, but I did a lot of running in my career, and I hold the record for the most number of New York City marathons for a female. So.
Wow. Fantastic. All right. Now we'll end it with Layla Rao.
And you definitely don't want to hear me think or run a marathon. So I founded a company called Agile Extended that takes this body of knowledge from Agile, Lean, system thinking, and design thinking, and applies that knowledge in innovative ways to solve business problems, including, for example, cybersecurity. How can you take all this Lean Agile knowledge to improve the cybersecurity outcome for organization? That's an example of the kind of value that we provide. Back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Layla. So with this, just a reminder to have your cell phones or another screen ready on your computer to participate in the poll everywhere polling that will come up. And if you have any questions or comments at any time, please feel free to enter it into the Q&A or the chat session. And I think Layla is going to help us out, make sure that you are heard. And just as a requirement, we would require that you all participate as much as possible and comment. This is supposed to be an interactive webinar. We're not looking to espouse, but we're looking to share. So I'm just going to kick it off here with the topics that we look to cover today. We may cover all of these. We may cover some in more detail than others, but these are some of the topics that we came up with. The first is, how does strategy to execution impact a resilient enterprise? We all want our companies to be resilient. And how does the strategy to execution translation impact that, the likelihood of that happening? The next topic is overcoming the challenges and transforming the strategy to execution. And then how do we enable decision making with and without data as we translate strategy to execution, which is, we all know that we're going to have a bit of hard data and a bit of soft data. We have to make decisions no matter what. And then we'll get into transforming to a resilient ecosystem. That'll be throughout the talk, and some of the major components of building a resilient ecosystem. So those are our topics. With that, I'll just kick it off with this slide. This is one of the first slides that the EIG group built together on strategy to execution, and we likened it to a bicycle. And as you see, there's two wheels making up the company's ecosystem, linking strategy to execution. And you see that the strategy wheel is a little bit bigger than the execution. So one revolution of strategy results in many execution cycles. But the chain is to show that these two worlds, the strategy and execution world, are linked. And of course, if they're not linked, you become derailed and you fall off your bike, so to speak. So we need to show how do we link these two worlds together of strategy and execution. In the strategy wheel, we broke it up into three major components: vision and brand, which is, who do we want to be when we grow up? 2, the intrinsic value. What's the intrinsic value of the company, the value of the organization? And 3, the operating structure. What is the operation structure that we need to achieve our vision and brand so that we gain more of our intrinsic value? So that's what we identified in the strategy wheel. In the execution wheel, we broke it down into 3 components again. This wheel starts with visibility. If you can't see it, you can't deal with it. You can't deal with it, you're not going to have good execution. The second component is the operational risk management. Is we need to be looking at what are those risks that are preventing us from doing what we said we were going to do. And then number 3 is then how do we span that across our entire enterprise, internally and externally? So I'm going to open it up for anyone to comments on this slide and what they've found.
So quick question, Jim, there seems to be a bad connection. There's a question online. Is the recording going to be available offline? I think.
Yes. Yeah, the recording will be available. Absolutely. Any other questions or comments on this slide?
No, I think other than just the obvious, Jim, you mentioned visibility, and the word is used very often, but it's not always implemented. It's, for me, really comes down to, are you able to see what you need to do so that you're making good decisions? It's not about seeing everything or nothing. It's really about having a focused outcome and knowing that you're making visible all the efforts related to that outcome.
Absolutely. So thank you, Layla, for that comment. Any other comments?
I'll just put a, go ahead, Sri.
So one of the, thank you. So one of the things that I have seen, Jim, in organizations is that there are silos of work happening all over the place that are disconnected or not connected to provide that level of vision. So not everything is aligned to strategy. So there are large programs, there are projects, there are activities, there are just data analytics stuff that goes on. And there is a need for aligning all activities to something very specific that harnesses the intrinsic value that you just mentioned.
Well said.
Yep. I'll make an injection. This is Greg from Supply Chain Risk Management. We look at it when we talk about visibility. We work with a lot of companies who have global supply chains. meaning hundreds of plants, hundreds of warehouses scattered all around the world. Visibility to us is visibility within your supply chain, down upstream to your suppliers and downstream to your customers. Many of us don't have good visibility throughout our supply chain, and our big push and reaction to focus on visibility is what you don't know about your supply chain can and will hurt you from a risk point of view. So that's our perspective of visibility, Jim.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Any other comments? Does this resonate as, you know, the challenges between strategy and execution in your company? Or from your experience, have you seen where we haven't been able to scale for growth because our strategy is not linked to execution, and we stall because we haven't updated the strategy and it's not aligned? Has that ever happened?
All too often. I've lost track of the number of times I'm in organizations where people are telling me, I don't know what leadership wants. I don't know what their priorities are. And leadership feels like they're making it very clear. There is a disconnect. And I think part of the disconnect comes from the culture. It's not necessarily about just having a strategy. It's how you communicate that strategy. It's how you align that strategy to the work that you're doing. And how do you incorporate feedback from execution back into your strategy? If you don't have that feedback loop, then the perception is going to be that strategy is disconnected from the real work that's happening.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. Does that trigger anybody else? Any comments? Okay. So the next slide is Phil's slide. So I'll hand it over to Phil.
This is a description of a business model. For any organizations to thrive, it must have a good, viable business model. What is a business model? It has 4 themes. What's the value proposition you're offering to the customers? And then how do you deliver the value to your customers? And then how do you create value? And then how do you capture the value? So value creation, you can break it down into its components. What's the main offering? What's your brand strategy? How the customers will perceive of you? What's the image? What's the message? And then what are the related offerings you might provide? At the Starbucks, you go for your drink, but anything else you get might be complimentary offering. So the next side is the value delivery. Who are your customers? What are the segments? What are the jobs they are trying to get done? And are they struggling? Are they changing? And then what kind of experience customers want to receive from you? And what are different ways customers access or you access the customers? Similarly, you can break it down on the value creation side. You have your core process that is enabling your delivery of your offering, creation of your offering. And then you have the enabling processes like human resource, marketing, product development, and then you partner with others in terms of creating value. So this demonstrates the business model, and then value capture is the profit basically you grab as a function of revenue minus cost. In the context of COVID, you have to ask the question, how well is your business model, or are there new business model that we can find? What are the changes in customers' expectations, customers' experience? Are the distribution channels changed? And then on the left side, all kinds of supply chain related. In fact, the whole thing is supply chain related. What are the changes, and do you have visibility? Are there opportunities to take advantage of? Are some of the questions that we should be asking. Jim, back to you.
Yeah, are there any comments from any of the team, or any comments coming in, questions about what we've covered thus far.
Sure. We do have a question, Jim. And that is, how different is this framework from the business model canvas that Alex Osterwald put together? And I'm seeing some pattern, but I'm also seeing some unique variations. So Phil, can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so lots of people have done research on the business model, what a business model is. Alex Osterwalder did his PhD thesis on that topic, and with his supervisor and 400 other people, he wrote the book on business model canvas. There are other varying models out there. There's one from Clayton Christensen, and there are about 5, 6, 7, 8 models that are slightly nuanced but unique. What we took is to look at all of them and found a way to integrate key concept behind each of them. So this looks probably closer to Alex Osterwalder's model.
Great.
And the other thing I will add is all of these model canvases, Phil noted, there are a number of variations. The point of this is to make it work for your context.
Mm-hmm.
So the boxes are designed to be replaceable. So think about what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the context that you're in, and adapt as needed. And if you don't find one that you like, keep looking or make your own, because there are any number of variations floating around.
Yeah, and I just echo that. You need to make it for your company that it makes sense for everyone in the company. There's no right or wrong here. These are just models, and every model is there just to give you a framework to get started. Your company needs to own its own framework.
I like the quote from a British psychologist recently passed away at the age of 94, Michael Curtin. He said, the paradox of structure, every structure is enabling and limiting at the same time. So this is nothing but another structure. So always have to ask the question, what are the enabling aspect of a structure and what are the limiting? I mean, this business model doesn't capture lots of other stuff like competitors and other things in the environment. So always have to be cognizant of what are the limits of your model or structure. What's interesting is it useful? I mean, we can see how if you use this as a lens, how people have come up with new business models and how people have taken advantage of opportunities in the middle of COVID. There's a famous example of a rather surprising example from Switzerland within hospitality industry. I mean, hospitality industry has pretty much all shut down due to coronavirus. Airlines have cut their flights. The governments are telling citizens to stay home. A organization by name Le Bijou, it's a high-end Swiss company. It's a luxury hotel and in part service apartment. They launched a creative COVID-19 service. They offer customizable stay with add-ons such as in-room COVID testing, doctor visit, nurse visit. So they took an adversity and they saw the silver lining in it and turned it into an opportunity for wealth creation. You can look it through the eyes of the business model and see how they flipped it around. And there are hundreds of such examples right in the middle of COVID.
Great. Any more questions coming in, Layla?
No, I think we're good for now.
All right. Well, this one might spawn some questions and comments. So I did a little research, and believe it or not, this is a shortened list of stats that I found of people planning and plan to execution, because that's what we're talking about. And execution, I tried my best to align some stats. They might not all perfectly be aligned, but that's not the point. They came from all these different sources that you see on the top here, all well-known and established folks that do fantastic work in doing surveys. So leverage that. And I'm going to just leave it open and let people hone in on a stat that they'd like to talk about. And from our participants or our partners here, please have at it.
Okay, I'm going to go first just because this summarizes pretty much everything I'm seeing. So 90% of employees do not understand their organization strategy, yes, and only 2% of leaders are confident they will achieve their objectives. Like cause and effect is like, this is about as basic a connection as you can make it. And that summarizes pretty much every problem that we see in organizations today.
Yes.
Yeah, this
Great.
is a great slide. I think one of the things that highlights here, Jim, and the team here is that why do 95% of people do not understand organization strategy? Typically, what I have seen is strategies remain in PowerPoint decks. It's not behind the receptionist desk. It's not part of the drinking water of an organization. So I think Leila kind of brought up earlier that how do you make it part of your culture, that strategy needs to be communicated to every individual in the organization, not just the C-suite and the top management needs to understand strategy. So, and that's the challenge across almost, I would say, except for GE, where you see that strategy and objectives and goals are part of the culture and the organization. I haven't seen anywhere else in my career.
The other thing I will add is communication, obviously, is a huge challenge, Sri. It's also co-creation. If your strategy is done by a vision group or a top leadership group in an offsite, and that just is sent across as a statement, it's not going to resonate. It's not going to be real. You
Right.
have to give your people an opportunity to be part of the strategy creation, a part of the vision creation. Then it becomes real and it becomes theirs. I often think communication is used as an excuse where we don't want to engage people. Communication isn't just after the fact, let's send it out in newspaper, bulletins, whatever. Communication means co-creation. That's the best communication vehicle there is.
That's a great point.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great point, Leila. I think engaging employees is part of the strategy, also drives change management. That's what makes it sticky from an execution standpoint. Great point.
Absolutely. You brought up all the points that I'm very passionate about. Any other points?
Great minds think alike. So a comment in the chat window is, someone's surprised that 68% of people believe their organization is good at developing strategy. And I somewhat facetiously remarked that I wonder if those respondents were involved in strategy development.
Yeah, these might be leaders. So this is 60% of leaders. So the leaders in the organization believe that they have a good way of developing strategy. So it's not, it is only the leaders, which I find quite interesting. And from what I remember from that particular stat, it's not down into the organization.
I think that
so it contradicts some of the other stats on here. That's why I put it up there.
Good point.
So the leaders believe that, 2/3 of leaders believe that they're doing a good job, right? But their organization is disjointed.
I'd like to comment that I think most organizations have strategies and goals that are just too vast, and that's why employees don't understand. They don't keep it simple. And the more complex your strategy is, the more complex your goals are, the less buy-in, because the less things will be understood. And I have seen that for decades. The terminology may change, but the problems remain the same. People don't want to keep it simple. And to me, that is one of the worst, the biggest flaws, the worst flaw, whatever you can say, is that things just get so complex, so large, that they're not understood by people.
So building on that point, why do you think that happens? Let's even say that they started off and said, we have 3 initiatives that we're working on, and they actually start correctly. What
is the 3 turns into 6, which turns into 9. This is what I see, that people don't stick with 2 or 3, which are doable. They never do. That's always the problem. There's 2A, 2B, 2C, 3A, 3B, 3C. That's what happens. And to me, that's why things fail so often.
I think this is a great discussion, C, and I think you're absolutely spot on. It's hard. It's really hard to make something simple, right? So, and I think that's why we have tools like Hoshin Connery and many other different approaches to address that. I mean, I think Mark has asked this question. Talk about this as Hoshin Connery. How can it address many of the statistics and things like that? Creating a few key result areas that the business needs to focus on, because just like in Six Sigma terms, how many whys do you want to address, right?
Right.
If you make your number of whys larger, your x's become exponentially larger and it becomes hard to manage, right? So how do you focus on the critical few to move the needle that you want to?
You need leadership to stay firm that there are 2 goals for this quarter or this half year and not 12. And that's where I see companies screwing up over and over again, that, it's, I don't know what the right term, I mean, it's a type of creep. They just don't know how to pick the most important things and stick with that.
See, is it because leadership generally does not know how to say no? Like, are we trying to please everybody? Or are we trying to respond to complexity with more complexity? Why do you think that might be?
I'll just throw something out there. I think that companies and leaders, they're well intended, but
Yes.
But sometimes you rob Peter to pay Paul. Sometimes you implement a change in one part of the organization that causes pain to another part of the organization. It's not taken into account. Sometimes that happens. Then you develop these pet projects that need to get done just in order for each of the silos to make their numbers, because they're all independent silos. So they start fighting against each other without even knowing. So before you know it, it all unravels because there isn't a collective, cohesive initiatives and how it's going to affect everyone positively or negatively. And that's not discussed because we want to keep it simple. So sometimes when you keep it so simple, you then stop communicating and then people don't know. And you make the message so simple, nobody really knows what's going on. And then you get a whole nother round of chatter in the hallways, so to speak.
Well, that's definitely,
Airways.
yeah, that's definitely an important point.
There's a good comment in the chat window about something that happens in the company I'm in, is that the pause and analysis that is needed to determine the best strategy is seen as a waste of time. How do you change that? In my experience, a lot of companies think that they confuse strategic planning with strategy development. And a lot of times they think that they can do 3 days offsite, go into the cave, and then they come back with the strategy. That's a completely flawed assumption. Strategy has to, what is strategy? It's about creating differentiation. It's about creating a unique position. A good strategy is not easy to copy. That should come from over a period of time by constantly looking inside and outside. And outside, you're asking questions about what changes are happening to customers and customers' expectations. What changes are happening with trends in the market? What are the changes with regulatory, environmental, economics? And that just cannot be done in 3 days offsite. So to the comment that's on the chat window, who is analyzing it as a function of time, monthly, weekly, and updating, these are the changes. And then you're also asking the question, what capabilities can address these problems? Technology capability, process capability, people capability, organizational capability. A good strategy is about matching those 2 things. And that's where the analysis is required. And many companies don't put the value in it. Some leaders are very good at it as what we call a pattern recognizers. Steve Jobs was good at it, so he was gifted at it. For the rest of us, we need a process and an analysis method to come so that we can develop strategy. Once you develop strategy, then it's a matter of planning. And the word strategic planning is a misnomer. There's little strategy in it. In fact, Professor Anderson from UCLA had a long lecture about it. The strategic planning is about budget, allocating resources, and people do that and saying, we will do this versus we won't do that. And Hoshin Kanri is very good at it, but strategy need to come in front of it, and that's many times missing.
Excellent. So I'm going to move along here. Was there any comments that we need to address before we move on?
Well, I was just going to say, we will see how many people change their strategy in 2020 from what they were going into 2020 with, right? Which was developed in Q4 2019. And my guess is that we'll look back and see the companies who did better in their peer group, right? I mean, if you're an airline, you were suffering across the board, but some probably are going to do better. And the question is why? So I think 2020 will be an interesting year to look at companies and who performed, better than their peer group based on making some strategic decisions in March, right, in Q1, and then constantly rethinking each quarter because the world was changing so rapidly.
Yeah. To echo your point, Sue, is the companies that obviously dealt with the supply demand imbalance that's shown on the slide and rapidly adjusted and took advantage of that, either reducing or expanding their portfolios and rescaling their supply chains, as this notes, are the ones that came out better. The folks that said, oh, it will get better, in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, which really we still don't know when, things are going to get back to normal. We're really in the same state we were in March when we closed everything down. We're approaching that state again. So we're smarter, but we're still having to deal with a supply demand imbalance that's occurring here in the marketplace. And it's interesting that the companies that, according to Fidelity, that have grown over the last year, not surprisingly, the number one is information technology, right? That's clearly the market cap on information technology has grown much higher than anyone else. And of course, the consumer products, the staple products has done well, but the discretionary spending has gone, those companies have done quite well in the communication sector, obviously. So the companies that are in the markets that are benefiting from this are certainly by just the pandemic itself and what it's all about, have done quite well. So just some initial thoughts on this slide. Any Greg Schlegel, I think you probably have a few words on this slide.
Well, it was a pretty good segue into the slide. The slide essentially is something we came up with, EIG and Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium at the end of March, essentially at the beginning of COVID-19. So we kind of looked at this as the COVID-19 W recovery. And again, our gig is supply and demand. Our gig is global supply chains. So the picture to us, Jim and I, kind of looked more like a continuum, and this is at the end of March of this year. So on the top of the slide, I'll just go through it real quick. The top of the slide from left to right are the government mandates, and we've all been impacted by them. On the y-axis on the left is our segmentation that we took upon ourselves in terms of the global supply and demand arena. All right, so on the top left of the Y, axis, we have over demand and under supply dilemma. In the middle of the graph, we have our baseline, which is supply and demand in a relative balance. And then on the bottom left, we have an under demand and oversupply dilemma. So on the bottom of the graph on the x-axis is essentially our perspective of what we saw going forward at the end of March. And subsequently, we called those the 3 R's. The first R is respond, and take a look at it. And we had good discussion already on this slide. We could talk to this slide for hours. The lockdown and government requirements of PPE, personal protection equipment, posed an unbelievable hardship initially on suppliers of healthcare materials, causing what? An over-demand situation and an undersupply. And so essentially in this first respond phase, those folks in PPE, those suppliers had to quickly rescale their supply chain. And we have hundreds of use cases we could describe if we had time. It is a white paper. It's several white papers. The secondary effect in this first R was from the lockdown was sectors other than healthcare. They had immediate under demand and oversupply of products in terms of restaurants, catering services, and on and on and on. And so everyone had to initially look at their product portfolios, as we've been talking about, and perhaps reducing marginal products and actually furloughing personnel to do what? To maintain cash flow. Second R is recovery. Again, now we think we were in recovery over the last 3 to 6 months, where government starts to reopen all these sectors and the reduction of COVID-19 cases that started to manifest itself into under demand and oversupply of PPE products. Now it's going back into the first R, which is why? Because of the second surge that CDC and the infectious disease group projected to us, gave that to us. We saw it, and it's now happening in November and December. All right. So in the second phase, we're still going back and forth trying to manage demand and supply. And then finally, in this new normal, whenever that is, folks, all sectors, no sector in this catastrophic event is immune. That's the difference between a hurricane and COVID-19. No sector is immune. All sectors have to be looking at their product portfolios. They have to continue to reinvent their portfolios, as Phil talked about, continue to rescale their supply chains and deal with their existing customers and perhaps new customers that they found what we called new channels, all right? So as the continuum progresses, folks, it tends to look to us more like a W recovery because of demand and supply shocks, the inherent latency in supply chains to rebalance themselves, and therefore we will probably all experience what we call the bullwhip effect, which is the W type recovery through the middle of 2021. So we wanted to just give you some context on this chart that we put together at the end of March. We still think it's valid, and we had some good segue before we got to the chart, and now it's open for discussion, I guess. So thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Comments? Anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat, but a general comment. So obviously supply chain makes total sense. I tend to work more in terms of how organizations handle their people and their work. And the same concept I think applies. There have been a series of decisions made by government that forces people to reassess who do they need to have when, what work can be done, what work can be postponed. And the organizations that are going to survive the best, I think, are the ones that have continued to assess what needs to be done and, more importantly, what doesn't need to be done. And the ones that are still trying to do it all are going to struggle the most, I would think.
Leila, you may be
Thanks,
right.
Jim.
Time will tell in terms of who's agile, who's flexible, who's ready to pivot. It's kind of exciting times in supply chain, folks, but it's also frustrating and scary.
It is, and it's a pretty bold approach. But everything that Agile has been talking about for the last decades, COVID has brought to force. You have to look at what you're doing. You have to look at what you don't do. And that's back to T's earlier point about having too many things. Most organizations are not good at saying no. And there is an Agile phrase that says, if you can't say no to anything, then you're not saying yes to anything either.
Yeah,
That's a good way to put it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on. I'm going to skip a slide. We're coming up on the hour, so I thought we'd get this survey in here. If folks can start responding to this on Poll Everywhere, pollev.com, Greg Schlegel 910. You have to be online. You can't do this on a cell phone. You need to open up the pollev.com, Greg Schlegel 910 on your browser to access this. So looks like we're getting a few respondents. So thanks to you all. We had 3, then we have 4. I don't know what happened there. Now it's going like crazy. So we'll have a drum roll here. 6, we got a sample. Let's see what happens. Let's see if I can get this to work. Show responses. Here we go. Wow. Wow.
Oh boy.
Wow. That's
You weren't expecting that, Jim?
yeah, you can rank more than one. So go back in there and choose more than one. But I guess we know what's number 1. You can go put them in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as long as you can go. If there's some other reason that's high up there, just hit that one just to find out if we missed anything on this list. But it looks like too many priorities is to catch all. Lack of leadership alignment, we've discussed that a bit. Poor follow through by leadership to realize the benefits. And then poor goal setting. Strategic goals are too large and complex. Somebody.
The survey only allowing you to pick one rather than ranking.
Is it only allowing you to pick one?
Yeah, I think that's the reason too many users.
Yeah, it's only one.
All right. Well, my bad. All right. Well,
that's why you had overwhelming too many priorities.
Maybe I tried to simplify it when I built the survey. Well, I think this is all good responses, and I appreciate everybody providing their responses. With that, I think we'll just move on to, let's move to, I think, why don't we move to this, Greg, Dr. Greg, why don't you introduce this slide, share with us, because I think now that we all agree it's too many priorities, what can we do about it?
Well, one thing that you can do, of course, is you can certainly try to innovate, and innovation is often presented as being something very simple when in fact it's much more complex than that. And basically what this diagram basically said, this matrix says, is that although there's a lot of information out there on product and process innovation, and you can define that in many different ways. I define that as either new, meaning such as inventions, it's creative, innovation, change, or improvement. And because many times innovation is not just something that is new, it's change or it's making something better. Not just better though, making it a leap forward better. The other ones that you see here are basically ones that are shaded, are ones that I wrote this slide out of a book I wrote, and I didn't have a chance to really do anything with the slide. This is just something that are not being addressed in the book. So the shaded ones aren't addressed in the book. When it comes to functional, operational type innovation strategies, or at least 2 of the 3 business strategies that go along with this as well. And in most cases, what you see is that if innovation is placed in terms of being disruptive innovation, you talked about Christians, and if that's disruptive innovation, that is one form of innovation, but only one form of innovation, and it's not going to work in any and all situations. You can also look at innovation as improvement, or in this particular case, I look at innovation as improving based on performance. So it's not just improving, which would be more focused on quality issues and things like that. They're trying to make an improvement, which looking at things like defect. Innovation, in essence, is looking at making something better that's already acceptable. Not necessarily there's no errors or necessarily mistakes associated with it. So I think the idea being that it is more complicated than that. This particular grid is being used at the Air Force. And I was mentioning to Jim about that, and Chris, okay, well, how come you're not working at the Air Force? Well, the other person who wrote the book with me is. So they're applying this at the Air Force. They've been very successful with this as well. And again, depending upon essentially the type of innovation you want to do or focused on what you do, there has to be possibilities. And you're talking about this with the COVID basically opening the door to possibility. And this is one of those possibilities, one of those choices that organizations, businesses can take. I think that's one thing we're not really sure what's going to happen, except that it's going to be different. I don't know if we're ever going to return to normal. It'll be some sort of new normal for whatever, but it is going to be something where it's going to be different than what we have existed in the past. So.
Some interesting concepts on innovation, just when we observe in the last 20 years in China, in how they've taken on innovation, and as we look to automate jobs, we worry about our workforce, and we said, well, we don't, if we automate too fast, then our workers won't have enough jobs. Where China looks at the opposite. Everybody in China is all about automating their jobs. They look at innovation completely different than we do here.
We don't look at.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, we don't look at innovation from a personal perspective. And people can be very innovative in and of themselves, but not necessarily be disruptive in their innovation. And you're interesting that you mentioned China, because this book was published in China and it's been very successful in China. So don't ask me why, but but because the book was actually written for the use in government, so which is kind of interesting in and of itself. You don't necessarily think of government innovation in the same breath. So
maybe they are more than we are, which may be interesting in itself. But just throwing out things to get people percolating.
So Greg, a quick question on the x-axis. When you have product, process, and service, tactical, operational, and strategic groupings of organizational structure, is the question you choose what organizational type you are trying to be or you are, and then look at how radical or complex your innovation strategy should be, and you pick one, and then you decompose that rectangle into the next steps?
Well, as you had done, Phil, in yours, because this is for the government, that's why it's broken into three pieces: tactical, operational, and strategic. Most people put operational and tactical together, and strategic or business models separate from that. So I think that just because it's written for government, it's broken into these three categories. Normally, it would probably just have two categories associated with it. So, but in government, there is a true difference between the tactical side and the operational side. And the idea being that both require a different type of innovative approach.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Any other comments?
The only other comment is, since this is my first time to be on here, I've been listening to what everybody else says. And I think that listening is a skill that, unfortunately, if people did listen better, they would be understanding the strategic goals better. That's for sure. So that's my only comment about that, is listening's important. And that's what I did here. So.
Great. Thanks, Greg.
Greg, there's a question in the chat window for you if you can go back for a second. And the question is it a choice among the three items on the x-axis, or can an organization operate in all three lanes at the same time?
They can operate in all three lanes at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Great. All right. So I thought we'd end it here. We just have a few more minutes left. Oh, we don't have any minutes left. So it's right at the hour, isn't it? So we're just gonna, let me just jump to the end here and close it out here. I want to thank everyone for joining us and participating. And the slides and the video will be online. The webinar, just like all of our other webinars, are online and accessible at EIG, consultingeig.com. So we look forward to you joining us in upcoming webinars in January. We have quite a number of them. We'll talk more about the W recovery and the 90-day plan, new product introduction, speed and resiliency, artificial intelligence, document automation, talent, rapid skills deployment, and the 90-day supply chain risk and resiliency action plan. So with that, I thank you all and wish you all the best of holidays. We at EIG appreciate your participation and your thought.